Hello, everyone, and welcome to Intersections Online, where Ryerson experts share their work and perspectives on topics that matter to our alumni and friends. My name is Christian Mehta, and I am the AVP of Engagement at the university. Before we begin, I want to pay my respects to the Indigenous peoples, elders, and ancestors who stewarded and cared for the nature and people who live on the land where Ryerson is located today. At the university, we have made important commitments to reconciliation and decolonization, and I invite you to learn more about this work online and in person next time we can get together on campus. A couple of quick reminders before we begin. One, this session is being recorded, so you can rewatch it and share it with anyone. You're going to get an email soon with a link, so please do revisit it when you can. And two, if you have a question for the panel, please type it in the Q&A area of Zoom, and we'll be sure to attend to it later on in the session. Today, we're exploring what the future of arts and culture will be in a post-pandemic world. And we are so fortunate to have alumnus Charles Falzon and Dean of the Ryerson's Faculty of Communication and Design to lead this discussion. Charles's work is informed by 30 years of leadership in public and private companies in media production, media distribution, book publishing, theme parks, and live entertainment. His work has been recognized through the Gemini Awards, Canadian Screen Awards, and an International Emmy nomination. Charles currently serves on the board of the Toronto Arts Council and was a member of the Minister of Heritage's Special Advisory Board. He was the founding chair of the Canadian Media Production Association, a governor of the Banff Festival, and is a member of the Order of Malta. Needless to say, we are all so fortunate that Charles is a stalwart leader of our university. Over to you, Charles.
Wow, I'm always embarrassed by such an introduction. Thank you. And I'm also really, what makes me nervous is not the fact that all the wonderful people are here live with this amazing panel, but that we're being recorded. So if we fumble, it'll live forever and it'll go viral. So I'm gonna make sure that if it's gonna be fumble, if there's a fumble, I'm not gonna be holding the ball. Good to see everybody. Welcome and thank you for having us. And thank you, Christian and the team at Ryerson Alumni for having this event. I think this is important for many reasons, but the first of which is to have our community, our extended community of our alumni and friends and colleagues to be connecting with us and knowing that we're all part of the same ecosystem, this creative ecosystem, and this humanity that is going through a variety of zigs and zags and figuring out how to navigate the present, how to survive the present, and to be ready for the future. I'm the chair of FCAD, the Faculty of Communication and Design, and we're really proud of our teams. We have some of Canada's leading and some of the world's leading schools in these fields. But the biggest asset that we have at FCAD is that we're really linked with the community, with our alumni, with industry, with partners, with government. We are not a separate kind of four-wall state of thinking. We are connected. So that's why these discussions are as important to our teams as they are to the greater community. We have four amazing panelists that will share their ideas, and I'll introduce them in a minute. And the ideas have to go beyond today, hopefully, survival and recovery, which is important. But it's also like, what is the impact of our times? What in terms of where we're going with this? What technological, social dynamics, political dynamics? What is happening during this era of COVID that will actually be a positive and challenging to how we interpret audience demand or consumer demand, how it affects production, how it affects distribution, how will it change forever, and also, what aspects of the pivoting that we've done is going to stay because it's great, or maybe should stay, and some should not. I just want to remind everybody, we look at these topics from three perspectives. We look at them from a human perspective, and the human dynamics right now are more acute and more important than ever. Our own sense of self, our own sense of each other, our own dynamics of social interchange are at a place where they have rarely been as crisp in a way, even though we're retreating in our spaces. So the human role, the effect of the human individuals in the arts and creative industry. Second one is an industrial perspective. And I want to talk a little bit about that because we rarely, other than people who are invested, hear it talked about as an important impact on the economy and the fabric of the growth of our country and international marketing. I mean, I just remind people, I like these statistics because they're important. From the direct economic impact, the last Statistic Canada figures show that there are around $60 billion in Canada, right? Just under around that. It may even be a bit more than that, 60 billion, right? And that's like, that's actually bigger than agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting. So just the actual impact on the economy and in terms of individuals, nearly like 800,000 jobs. So there is that impact. And then the other impact is the social impact, how we're creating new narratives, how we're part of the healing that is going on, not just because of COVID, but because of so many things that we are fortunate to be spotlighting together in society, not the least of which is decolonization and inclusion, and there's so many layers. So creativity and the arts and cultural sector is not just about a few people in a corner doing their stuff. It's a real social impact. So with no further ado, I'm going to quickly introduce the audience and get started in this discussion. In no particular order, well, maybe it is a particular order. I think it's in alphabetical order. I'll start with Yoon Chung, and Yoon's an alumna, really excited, a Ryerson alumna who is the founder and designer and CEO of ONA, which is a high-performance fashion brand focused on delivering forward-thinking design and innovative, easy-to-care for fabrics, easy-to-care for fabrics. She has spent the past 25 years of her career leading innovation for several brands and e-commerce sites. Yoon, how are you doing? How are things going? And I know you're in LA and you're complaining about the cold. And I'm sorry, I'm not really that sympathetic.
Hi everyone. Great to meet you. I'm doing great. Coming out of COVID, I think everybody's kind of ready to go out and have more human contact. We've been super busy. E-com, as everybody know, has done really well throughout COVID. So we've been super busy, but we're all working at home. So it's been a great year. Great to meet you, everyone.
Thank you for joining us, Yoon. Next is Dalton. Dalton Higgins is a publicist, author of 6 books, National Magazine award-winning journalist, podcast host, and longtime music presenter. But I think the pièce de la résistance for Dalton is he is now our professional in residence in our new music program, because I am very modest about our music program, but I know it's really strong, particularly because we have someone like Dalton being a co-architect of its future. So, but Dalton is, as a publicist, an indie PR company owner, has managed publicity campaigns for a wide range of artists who have won Grammys, Junos, BET Awards, and over the last decade. And Dalton, good to see you. And how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. Thanks for asking, and thanks for having me out. This is fantastic. I mean, as you just stated, a lot of my time, pre-pandemic was spent hanging out, at television stations, radio, and also, just sort of podcasts, but in real life. So it's been quite interesting. Even a couple of our panelists today, Zabe and Yoon, how they're out in California, and I have clients out in California. So what used to happen, in the publicity world is they travel to New York, they come to Toronto, they go to Bell Media, Rogers, do their thing. But it's just wildly interesting having clients of mine do live performances from LA, like in their bedrooms or their condos, in their backyards, and transmitting it through Canadian media. So it's interesting times for sure.
Thanks a lot. Good to have you on this and on this panel. And now next is Caroline O'Brien, who is an associate professor in FGAD and associate professor in costume design at Ryerson University in Toronto, and was appointed chair of the School of Performance in 2019. So she is transforming our school in a time of real change as the whole field is being transformed. Caroline has worked in costuming as well as large-scale sculpture incorporating industrial metal textiles and fashion fabrics. Caroline's research interests include material and visual culture and the study of costume for ballet. And Caroline, other than being exhausted, how are you doing?
Hi, Charles. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to join the panel. Today, we are preparing to launch our world premiere this evening. Our fourth-year actors are in performance tonight. We're in Tech Week, and next week we run a series of performances. Normally, this would have happened on campus, and we would all be spending all of our time there. And now this world has shrunk to my four walls, and we're doing it all, as Dalton suggested, we're doing it all from home. But it's going. We're all doing what we can.
Yeah, I think the energy and vibrancy of the school and the students in particular and their commitment to the field is a real tribute, not just to your leadership and the work in the school, but to the passion and the resilience that young talent have. And they're just still committed and dancing and acting every way they can. So good work. Last but not least, Zabe Sheikh began his mandate as Consul General of Canada in Los Angeles in December 2018, coming to the posting after an extensive career in media and entertainment industries, having worked as an actor and producer in theater, film, television, and more. His work includes acting roles in Deepa Mehta's film Midnight's Children, as well as starring in the CBC comedy series, which we all loved very much, Little Mosque on the Prairie. From 2014 until his appointment in 2018, Zabe was the film commissioner and director of entertainment industries for the city of Toronto. Zabe, good to see you. How are you doing?
Great to see you, Charles. Great to see everybody on the panel. Hello, everybody watching. Bonjour tout le monde. It's been a devastating year, of course, and we're going to talk about that and how we're going to, in the words of the Prime Minister and the President, build back better. But I think what's important to share with you from LA, and Yoon knows this, is that early on in the pandemic, of course, LA was in a real bad way. Things were looking really dire, and now things are looking better because of vaccination rates, and we're watching herd immunity go up, and we're watching rates of positivity go down. And so that's a good thing. So of course, we're also sending Toronto and whoever is watching in Ontario and Canada a lot of good vibes, because we have been through that roller coaster that you folks are now in. We're hoping you're just a few weeks behind us, and we're looking forward to all of us being able to be back together, whether it's in LA or Toronto. And when and where we can, we're looking forward to welcoming you to Canada's House in LA very soon.
Thank you very much. We all want to be able to fly down there quite quickly. So let's start a little bit and build on that in terms of the ups and downs of this phase of survival. And as I said, this panel is mainly about the future, but we can't talk about the future without acknowledging the fact that there's a lot of struggle happening right now. And maybe I can ask a couple of you to start us off with a little bit of insight as to how have been people surviving in the various fields? What are some of the things that you've seen, and where hasn't it been working? What are some of the kind of a snapshot? I can start just to put you on the spot, Dalton, with you, but people pitch in, like in the music industry, for example, particularly. Let's take that as an example. How are people doing?
Yeah. Well, yeah, the music industry, it's an interesting thing because, according to some of the, I guess, studies, hard data, or some estimates rather, music industry types, they're saying we won't recover, to pre-COVID levels until maybe 2023, 24. And so what we found in the music industry, in Toronto in particular, and Canada in general, at the onset of any crisis situation, there's always this moment of sort of like a flat out, existential panic, that lasts, frankly, for a relatively short period of time, So, if we're talking about, just for the average layperson, it meant going out and buying like toilet paper and hand sanitizer, like in storage closets. That's how it played out there. So for arts and culture workers and musicians in particular, it sort of meant having to be innovative out of necessity. All right. And, so when you're innovating out of necessity or trying to build something out of nothing much or far less resources, some very exciting things can happen, right? So it's not all doom and gloom, okay? So, the example I'm going to give you is, I sort of say this as someone who works out of the hip hop tradition. And, when you look at the history of hip hop, it's basically, it's a byproduct of Reaganomics, of just poor planning, as far as the Reagan administration in the 80s. And, so while some of America thrived under Reagan's administration, his economic policies, domestic drug policies, it basically decimated marginalized communities, right? And when it comes to music now, we talk about the origin of rap music and hip hop culture. Reaganomics effectively wiped away music programs in inner city schools, okay? And then, so out of that wreckage, and out of that very myopic kind of vision came hip hop culture. It came out of the ruins of something really poor and terrible, okay? So I want, a lot of the listeners and viewers to sort of look at that. Some greatness, comes out of chaos, like hip hop culture. There would be no hip hop culture as an art form if not for some of the chaos that happened in New York in the late 70s vis-a-vis the Reagan administration, okay? And I'll give you now, and this is sort of, kind of like the glass half full approach. I'm going to take a lot of that today because we hear enough terrible news as far as the daily news cycle. It's quite terrible more oftentimes than not. There are a bunch of musicians in Toronto that have become quite prolific. Having all of this extra time to sit around in one's bedrooms and basements, garages, backyards, it's meant that there have been a bunch of artists, in Toronto in particular, that are just cranking out a lot of artistic and musical output, okay? So many artists have managed to do some big and admirable things over the last year or so. It's not all doom and gloom. And there's this one musician, his name is Daniel Romano, and he's like this singer-songwriter out of Welland, Ontario. And over this pandemic, it's been over a year now, almost 13 months. He's put out like, I think 9 or 10 albums since the mid-March lockdown last year, okay? So this pandemic has really done something to separate, the artists from the artistes. People are becoming very prolific as far as their musical and artistic output.
So that's encouraging, and I love the glass half full. I want, maybe Caroline, I can ask your thoughts as to what you're hearing in terms of the acting community and the dancing community, because it's in my mind, unlike musicians who can still create music and figure out ways of delivering it, I can't see how performance happens without people coming into a stage and into a theater and so on. What are you hearing in terms of how people are, are once we get out of this, are there going to still be people who are going to be acting and dancing, or have they all gone and worked and changed their careers?
That's a good question. There will definitely be performance after this. I would agree with Dalton. I think of this as glass half full, and people are really looking to strategize for what's happening right now as we look to what we can anticipate next. And I think the students in our school, for instance, are really interested in training. We've adapted, we've gotten used to the thing that we all know we have to do right now because it affects everybody. It's not just any one person, or it's just not just our program. Our colleagues in the industry, everybody is looking to see what kind of projects can we make right now, but we all, I think, are unanimous in acknowledging that we strive for the in-person contact. We need the human contact in order to do our rehearsals, create our work, from the hanging of a light to the opening night, and having the performers on the stage. So what we're noticing in the industry is performances are happening outdoors, performances are being recorded and streamed. What can we do now while we wait and anticipate? And young people coming up are also looking to train. I don't see any halt in people's passion for this kind of work.
Encouraging. Zabe, my read of LA at best of times is there's a lot of people trying to figure out how to get their next production, how to get their next job. It's not, we see the glamour, we see the big successes, but I know what it's like when you go into a hotel and people are pitching you scripts as you're walking in and so on. That's real and so on. What's the feel right now in this cultural hub of Los Angeles? How is the actual creative community surviving? What's your read of it?
Thanks, Charles. It's nice that we're having this conversation at this phase of the pandemic where we all, I think, can see that proverbial light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully it's not one of those Murphy's Laws issues. But I'll be honest, our consulate oversees the territory and represents Canada in LA, Southern California, Nevada, and Arizona. And so when you take a look at the film, entertainment, media, sports kind of industrial complex, I like to talk about that rather than the military industrial complex, that took a big hit overall, of course, not just early on, but throughout. So whether it was live events in places like Vegas, huge Canadian company like Cirque du Soleil, I think we all heard, I'm sure you all heard in the news back in Canada, but definitely we were feeling that here in market, if you will. Film took, we're just seeing it now coming back to not pre-pandemic times, but back to some sort of semblance of positivity in the fourth quarter. But it's still down 25% from last year. That's overall production. Feature films saw a huge decline, down 56% from the previous year. Television was down 38%. That being said, again, in that glass half full, Dalton, thanks for kicking us off on a positive note. That wasn't necessarily bad for Canada, though, because of course we've got to see more Canadian shows and more Canadian artists on those screens, whether it was broadcast television, Transplant, a big Canadian show, actually had its NBC premiere. And the pandemic was, in a way, a factor in that because New Amsterdam had to be shuttered. And so Transplant took its slot. And it's a great show also about inclusivity, if you know, or at least diversity, showing the diverse faces and cultures that actually make up the medical industry. Then other shows like Canada's Coroner, that was on the C-Dub. These are great little moments to talk about as you think about also the overall devastation now. Some of the things are also sad because, as we just heard, I'm sure, again, it was at least a big to-do in LA and New York, I know, major theaters, cinemas, actual houses where people go to see things have and will likely be shuttered even beyond the pandemic. Many of them, the most famous currently, ArcLight and Pacific Theaters, right? The Dome in LA, some of the biggest premieres that people think about in the last 20 years, in the last 50 years, in the last 75 years, in a way, come from those theaters, and to have those shuttered will make an impact. Independent venues, Dalton talked about the musicians, legendary clubs, Troubadour, Largo, they had to open a GoFundMe campaign. That's a good thing. We live in a world where GoFundMe exists. So that's good, but the fact that they had to go there was troubling. Ultimately, I think this COVID pandemic highlighted the consistent pandemic that's been happening for a long time, which is, of course, the social racial inequity. And that pandemic still has yet to find its vaccine, but we're all working on it. And hopefully we'll be part of this conversation. We'll get to talk about it a little bit more too.
Absolutely. It's a big part of the not just half full, but what have we learned during this time that we want to keep? What have we focused on that we want to keep? Now that's a good way to segue to things we want to keep. But before we go to the narrative and the content and the inclusion, I want to just focus a little bit on the technology. And I'm going to start with you, because you are an example of somebody who pivoted and that you've pivoted to something that is positive, and I'm interested in maybe you can share that and also talk about how you're going to keep that and how that's going to be part of your future even beyond COVID. So over to you.
I think it was scary last year in the beginning. Everybody got kind of the COVID facing. Nobody knew how to move forward. Fashion industry took a huge hit. I was doing my first engagement was wholesale, so dealing with a lot of brick and mortar stores. and everybody got cancellations. You know, a lot of big companies got huge cancellation. Warnings went out of business, and we all froze. We didn't know how to, you know, what do we do with this? And we just had to pivot and let's focus on direct to consumer, because that was the only way that we can actually sell and ship to customer directly. So first, I guess from April to July, e-commerce had a phenomenal results. Anybody who jumped on, it was incredible. We still talk about it, all digital marketers, what kind of crazy, you know, traffic that it created, which to me was shocking, because I did not think, you know, as Dalton said, I didn't think people were going to spend money on buying clothes, but, you know, fashion, I guess, is still existed, and people still went on site and bought things. And having said that, now all big players are focusing on e-commerce. So I just heard Saks is going to inject, I don't know, $4 or $5 million rebuilding their e-commerce site. So I think industry will change. I do not think we're going to go back to where we were with brick and mortar stores. It's going to be more e-commerce driven, which also is going to make a small business owners, is going to make it challenging for them to kind of compete with you know, big brands. Now everybody's jumping on e-commerce. So there definitely will be a shift in fashion industry, and e-commerce, I believe, is going to be a huge part of going forward our industry.
So let's expand on that. Thank you. That's actually quite exciting that this has become a big part of your business, and that in fact, after the initial scare, innovation set in, and that you've been successful. So I want to look at some of the other fields, and I can ask Dalton, for example, the technology, just focus just on the distribution machine, and actually all of you, I'll open it up. What do we feel is sticking in television and film? Will we have those big cinemas? Who knows, right? Will people, I know our own gut tells us, but or are people so now excited about their home theater experience? What is happening with rock concerts? So going forward, I know that even friends of mine in England that are going back to rock concerts, they're sort of saying it's not the same, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm curious what you, in each of your areas, think about. What's a keeper from technology, and what's there's no doubt it's not gonna, it's not something that that's gonna survive after necessity. Will panels like this be effective, because we can have, a couple of hundred people tuning in without having to figure out how to spend the afternoon and figure out, or we have guest speakers from LA here with us and chatting, right? That's an example of technology that I think is interesting as a keeper. Dalton, with the music industry, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to sort of piggyback on what you just said, this idea of being able, because we're doing everything vis-a-vis these types of digital platforms, whether it be, Zoom, Skype, Microsoft Teams. I've used about 6 different platforms. One thing it has done, again, I'll sort of continue on this glass half full journey, so bear with me, but it has, enabled us to have far greater access to the opportunity to collaborate. So if we're talking about music, for example, the opportunity to collaborate with musicians from around the globe, whereas perhaps, pre-pandemic, that might not have been possible. If we were gonna, host, you moderate this panel discussion pre-pandemic, that might have meant picking up the costs, for Yoon and Zabe to fly in from California. And so it's just it's a costly endeavor. And so from a musician standpoint, I see a lot of collaboration, right? There are musicians here that work in a lot of the electronic-based musics that I manage from a publicity standpoint, but just doing, collaborating with people in Austin, Texas, over to, Eastern Europe. Like, I'm seeing some amazing things happening where don't have to think about the hard costs tied to, travel, hotel accommodations, that type of thing. As far as now, engaging media, social media, digital economy, I mean, certainly there were a lot of musicians I saw and music practitioners that were maybe a little resistant to engaging social media, whether that be Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, etc. Where now they're all over that, like 24/7, right? So I've seen a radical shift over the last 13 months where musicians, music practitioners are hyper focusing on how they're performing on Instagram, DSPs, digital service providers, Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal. You're seeing a lot of that, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention TikTok. A lot of TikTok for those who are perhaps 25 and under, millennials, Generation Z. TikTok is a thing. It's been a thing for the last couple of years, but I'm seeing the 23 and over crowd engaging TikTok accounts in a way that pre-pandemic I just didn't see, to be perfectly honest, right? Now, as far as music performance, what I will say is that because a lot of we talk about performance arts, doing live performances, concerts, a lot of that is happening online as far as, vis-a-vis Zoom and what have you. A lot of musicians the adjustments I see happening on the ground is, some musicians and some of my clients, they've been forced to sort of, I guess, learn how to play they're playing for far less wages for one, so if you do a show online, you get paid $1,000, that would have normally been $6,000, right? So a lot more musicians are now figuring out how to play solo sets. Being able to, if you're a singer-songwriter, you play by yourself in front of your laptop versus having to bring in your 6-piece band, which means not having to rehearse with your sidemen or sidewomen and having to pay those sidemen and sidewomen, right? So you're learning how to do far more with less, just in a very, practical, pragmatic way, all right? So more tech reliance, more focusing on self, using loop pedals. I've seen a rise in laptop musicians, for example. This idea of bringing in orchestras and large bands, super downward spiral has been happening over the last little while.
So I've got some amazing questions popping up, and I'm going to weave some of them in if we can. I may not be able to get to all of them, but I'm trying to weave them in. And Zabe, in the continuation of talking about the technology and what's a keeper and what's not, one of the questions or comments is about audiences being hesitant to return in the near future, and how does technology help us? The question specifically says here, would technologies like simple proximity warning devices reassure attendees? I'm not sure exactly that's an element that could, of people knowing, okay, who's around me, but just generally, if you could comment on your sense from where you stand with those industries in terms of audiences, technology, and how many of us are just how are going to be happier consuming it without actually being near people.
Well, just as artists quickly innovate, industries in entertainment and arts quickly innovate as well, as you rightly pointed out, Charles. And so what we're seeing, at least in terms of, if you don't talk about the creation phase, but the consumption phase and the audience phase, that in fact, if you think about 2020 with massive festivals like Coachella and Lollapalooza going down for the year at least, what happened? Well, the biggest concert, of course, was online. And not only was it online in 2020, it was in a video game. It was Fortnite, and it was Travis Scott, right? 27 million people tuned in to play, to collaborate in the game, but also, let's be honest, to watch that colossal image of Travis Scott do his thing and listen and attend. And so attendance meant something very different. If you think about The Weeknd and his collaboration with Wave XR, which is a SoCal-based company, and TikTok. Dalton mentioned TikTok. So TikTok out of Culver City and Wave XR did a whole concert with The Weeknd, and that was a 3 million viewer concert. That wasn't a game, so it wasn't going to be interactive. It was just as if you would go to a venue, except you got to do it online, and you got to have this full experience, and The Weeknd got to perform not for 20,000, not for 40,000, not for 100,000 people. He got 3 million people in that session. So that is the kind of possibility we think about. If you think about the sports pivot, what happened to sports leagues? What's happened to basketball? What happened to football? What's going on in Major League Baseball? They're trying to figure out ways, not just about the audience experience in-house, they're really now developing technologies. Yoon talked about the e-commerce pivot that retailers are going through. Well, those hard venues are also going through a literal e-pivot. Because their audiences are going to buy things, their audiences are going to view things and experience things probably more online, at least in the next couple of years. If not now, the game has probably changed for good.
Yeah, and what the marketing experts, if there is such a thing as a marketing crystal ball, are saying is that some version of a hybrid model for most of the consumer and audience interactions is a reality. I want to bring it to a little bit more of the local. I've got a couple of questions, and Caroline, maybe I can ask you to comment on this. And you know, there's a lot of work. The work of the artist, that is the fuel, the machine, the driver is the better word for all of this, is the creative artist, happens very often not in the big industrial machine and marketing, but happens with the individual artist, happens in local orchestras, happens in community theaters, happens in these various places that nurture creativity. And I'm trying to paraphrase three questions here into one. The bottom line is, and I know, and also and universities and theater schools do a lot of work in this area. And I thought maybe, Caroline, you could comment a little bit as to how that is surviving in terms of the connection with the community theaters and how they're doing. And then the second part of the question, which I can open it up to all of you, but maybe particularly Zabe, is where does government fit in to make sure that these people are surviving as well? Because they've been reliant, many of them, on CERB and other things, and so just trying to figure out how, while we're talking about the industry and marketing it and getting to audiences, and the cup is half full, it may not feel half full to the person who is developing amazing things, but doesn't have anywhere to earn a living. So that's a big kind of subject area. As I said, I've tried to combine three eloquent questions, and I'm not sure I did a good job on that. But Caroline, maybe you could comment first, please.
Sure. And I think that where some of this world has changed from my perspective this year is the community has really reached out. There's a lot of conversation, a lot of collaboration going on among theater companies, educators, etc. Individual artists have been very innovative in trying to find new ways to do things. TikTok is one of the big ones, but how can we use some of the emerging digital technologies and try them out and experiment with them, and then share the best ways of use? So that's where education and industry can work and have been working together. If there are possibilities to share resources, we have much more access to international artists. And so bringing guests into our own programs, bringing guests into small theater companies, larger theater companies. And every time, I mean, there's been a lot of times that we get thrown another curveball. So it's a constant uncertainty. And especially this week in Toronto, for the last number of weeks, I know that there have been several creative projects underway in space to be recorded that have recently been shut down because of the uncertainty and safety, the precarity of it right now. It's a constant resilience. It's a call to reinvent all the time. And there are a number of artists that I know, young artists, who are also diversifying a bit, retraining. If things aren't playing out the way that we want to at the moment, what are the other ways that we can do things? What are the other things that can be done? And really, it's the strongest one, I would say, is the community has pulled together. People are really speaking to one another, taking care of one another in ways that are really strengthening.
Thank you. I'll ask you about the government thing as well, Zabe, but I'll open it up. There's a question, and I've always wanted to say this. I've got a question from Cassie, who's joining us from Tokyo. I've always wanted to say that. And Cassie, hi, in Tokyo. And it's directed to all of you, but I'm going to start with you, Zabe, and you connected with the government's kind of prioritization in your mind. And that's really about, I'll read the question. Since the start of the pandemic, many people have seen arts as non-essential. what do you think will be the most important thing for the arts to do in a post-pandemic world to keep new and upcoming talent to start learning the craft? And I'm combining that with the other question is about how do we keep it as a priority in the government's mind, as as an area to focus on and support artists. So that's just a very simple question for you, Zabe.
Well, I think we're lucky to have a federal government that is actually very interested, knowledgeable, and focused on the fact that arts and entertainment and culture are an important facet, not just of the country's brand values on a global scale, but also actually economically. You mentioned the economic factors earlier, Charles, in your intro, in terms of what the industry, frankly, the output is compared to other industries. And so the government understands that because they have a lot of ministers working and a lot of data analysts crunching those numbers and figuring that out. So in terms of what the government did or is doing, I'll give you a quick hit. Well, in April 2020, there was $500 million in specific COVID-19 emergency support for cultural heritage and sport organizations. And the objectives of the funding were, of course, to maintain jobs and support the community and the continuity for the creative sector. Canadian Heritage, of course, really stepped up, and up to 326 million was distributed through Canadian Heritage. 115 additional million went to support this, specifically the Canadian audiovisual sector, including the Canadian Media Fund, which everybody here is well versed in, I'm sure, at around 89 million. And for telefilm, it was 27 million. And then in fall 2020, I'm speaking about the April 2020 budget, then in fall 2020, another $181 million for the live arts and music sectors that Dalton was mentioning really came through Digital Now, which 50 million was specifically for the digital innovation and creation for the arts and music sector. And then now, in February 2021, Heritage Canada just doubled to 100 million, the short-term compensation fund to help audiovisual productions as well. So in terms of what government can do, it can step up by making these kinds of commitments through its budget process. And that is an important thing that I think any government has to do, and this particular government is doing. In terms of what we're doing here on the ground at the consulate, we pivoted greatly. We always host a lot of things. We're, a facilitator, a convener, of course. We help export the great Canadian talent. We've had to turn everything into virtual, and we're turning a lot of things into accelerators. So we're taking mid-size companies and putting them in cohorts and really helping them accelerate to get connected in a way that they just can't right now to the community here in LA and Southern California. And so that's something that we're doing, and we've amped it up, we've ramped it up, and we're looking forward to turning that half full glass into a full glass.
Well, that's great to hear. And I think that, the bottom line of all that, which is, first of all, terrific. That's good to remind us of all the investment and support that's already happening, which shows that even though we may not be reading as much about it, it is a commitment by the governments. But I think that we all need to do more together to help make sure it's front of mind. And it's easy for us to check off a box and say, okay, well, that's covered. I think that it is because it's easy for these fields to be taken as non-priority, which is the point. I'm trying to get through questions, and I invite people to ask questions online, and I'll get to as many of them as possible. But I want to move to the topic of, which is I see as another cup half full aspect of our times, which is the refocus, the sharper focus on inclusion, on diversity. I call it a wake-up call for many of us. Many people were awake a long time and are just tired of the rest of us not being awake. So I think that I want to talk about that and how that's part of what hopefully will be the what we look back and say, wow, that COVID era was a time where we finally started to take it even more seriously. And that's broad. So, I'll start with you in terms of the fashion industry, how you're seeing it, but it's a broad thing. I will comment that in just simple little things. It's not about inclusion or really, but it is a bit diversity. Like a few years ago, if you had told me that we were going to be the American market and the Canadian market was going to be watching things with subtitles coming from other countries in the world and things like that, that would never have happened. We have now a little bit more access to a world app that in terms of the content mix. So it shows that audiences are open and want diversity. It's the system that held it back. It's the people who thought that they knew better than the audiences that said, no, we don't do this, or no, we don't do that. So with that little personal editorial, Yoon, how do you think we're doing particularly in your area in the fashion world right now, and how's it shifting right now in terms of diversity, inclusion, and equity?
A very interesting topic. We've gone through, especially in LA, a lot of things happened past 12 months. So it was an interesting time. Definitely, I'm sure everybody noticed now e-commerce, a lot of sites try to use, a diversity models, whether it's, color of their skin or size, that is. So one thing that I personally noticed, carrying bigger sizes is very important. All retailers are asking for that. So, they call it extended sizing or bigger sizing. So that has been focused, I think, which is great, because in high fashion, especially, there was something that wasn't really practiced for many, many years. So it's really, I'm super happy to see that. And especially for, ONA, everything is about 4-way stretch. So we're trying to also be more inclusive, size inclusive models. We do follow photo shoot all the time, especially for e-commerce. We're constantly wanting assets. So if, it's noticeable how much more diversity of model choices are out there now. From 2 years ago to now, it's outstandingly different. And I think it's going to take some time for people to, because I see different things from e-commerce and what's, data, what's showing, what clicks more and what doesn't. But I think it's a great, important time that we're going through this phase, that more people practice, inclusivity. I think that we all, as a consumer, are going to get more used to seeing different things, different body types, different skin colors, different hairs even. So it's very exciting for us to see that in fashion.
Well, that's good to hear. I'm just curious, you also see it in terms of the leadership and the lead designers and the marketers within the fashion industry?
Absolutely. There's a lot of more support even within community, supporting, minority. I mean, me being, Asian, that has happened a lot, which is great to see. And so I think I'm noticing that people are keeping that in mind. There's more awareness than it ever has been past 10 years that I've been in this industry working.
That's encouraging. Dalton, are you able to keep the half glass full on this topic from your perspective and music industry and more?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to give you a couple perspectives. I mean, one is, certainly the death of George Floyd at the hands of a police officer in the United States, that obviously gave rise to, discussions about systemic racism in many areas, including the music industry, obviously. Now, that's not to say that pre-George Floyd that problems didn't exist in the music industry prior to COVID, but I think because the pandemic happened during this time of heightened awareness around systemic racism and exclusion, what it's done, it's created this sort of new civil rights movement, which we've probably seen, happen, in North America, certainly the world. And what it's done, it's sort of brought into focus, the need for greater, have more conversations around racial inclusion and representation. What I would say, from an artistic standpoint, what I've noticed is whether it be, my clients and just the music industry in general, a lot of the subject matter, so if you're a singer-songwriter, you're a rapper, you're a wordsmith, you're a poet, there's a lot more sort of issues-oriented subject matter. That's one thing that I picked up on over this last year, that's for sure. So we've seen a lot more sort of social protest themed music, as far as musical output. over this last year. All right. And you know, when we talk about systemic bias and we're talking about diversity inclusion in the music industry in particular, what I will say is it really does play a huge role, massive role in who gets access to grants and funds in Canada. In Toronto, where I'm situated, it plays a big role in who gets opportunities to play live and have their music heard and get past, you know, I guess the so-called gatekeepers. And you know, one thing I will say is that this pandemic has actually kind of widened that divide. As emerging and already marginalized artists, they've been hit the hardest by the pandemic. All right. So we can't tiptoe around those issues. I can't paint a pretty picture where that's concerned. What I will say on the flip side is people are now starting to organize a lot more as far as organizations, individuals, musicians, music operatives. You know, in Canada, we have this new collective, this new organization called Advance, and Advance was set up as a music industry collective to sort of lead the change in developing an infrastructure for the betterment of, you know, Black people that work in the music business. All right, and it's a big initiative. It was founded by executives at all three of the major labels in Canada, and it includes over, you know, 100 plus people that are working at all levels within the Canadian music industry. Right, so that's good, is that people are talking about diversity inclusion a lot more than they had been in the past, and people are organizing for it, so that moving forward we can, you know, just take a more progressive, forward-thinking approach to diversity inclusion.
Well, thanks for that. I think it's the same comment I would make that I made about, you know, keeping it front of mind with the government in terms of funding needed for artists. It's about keeping this always front of mind. It's not just a checking off the box. It has, and I think the creative community plays various roles in this, not just about making sure there's inclusion in the creative community and in the creative content, but actually about pushing this to be front of mind in society at large as part of our narratives, part of our music, part of our stories, part of our activity, part of what we put in the market. It really is, I believe we're a catalyst for change. Caroline, I've got a question here, and I'm going to connect it with to inclusion as well, about students coming in now, young people, you know, who fear there's no work in these fields, and it is even more an issue with certain people who may have a predisposition to taking career paths, and they feel that it's actually not equitable because certain people, the fields may not attract to the schools. People from marginalized backgrounds. This was the nature of the question. But generally, like in terms of equity and inclusion, how are we, I shouldn't say you, how are we doing with making sure that we have representation of talent of young students in our schools? And how are we dealing with the fact that the future may not be predictable in terms of work for all of them?
Thanks, Charles. How are we dealing with, I'll call it recruitment? How do we diversify and make our community more inclusive? Is through reaching out across schools and communities that may not automatically have access to us, sharing through education, the fact that these opportunities exist and that there are creative fields for young people to enter into, and engaging in conversations with current professionals where we demonstrate an intention towards sustainable change. I think that's kind of the phrase that I like this year, which is that we're committed to what kind of future do we want to create, and where is the voice of the young people in creating that future. I will say, because I'm involved in recruitment, over the last few weeks, I've been speaking with young people applying into the programs, and there doesn't seem to be fear about, will it be okay? You know, when in other periods of time, in other generations isn't the right word, but we all have a story about our parents or our families were afraid of us entering this field for lots of different reasons. It was about income, it was about social, it was about political, but we all did it anyway. And we all have found our way, and we have all found ways to do it. I think there will be echoes of this pandemic for a few years to come. I don't think it's going to end very quickly, but I don't think I've heard the word hybrid this afternoon. There are ways to do it where we'll ebb and flow a bit, and we'll go out, we'll come back. But as long as we have a clearly identified goal for how do we broaden our understanding and make our communities much more inclusive, then that will guide us.
Thank you so much. We're out of time, but Zabe, I'll give you the last word. What's your top line perspective of how we're doing with this journey of inclusion and diversity?
Thanks. I'd say that we're actually at a better place, of course, than we ever have been in the last probably 50, 60 years in terms of the awareness and the re-awareness and the reimagining. Technology, the business sector, the fact that there's many more artists and folks that are now of color, of different genders, of different sexual orientations. This is meaningful, of different abilities. This is meaningful because, in fact, whether it's Disney, whether it's CBS, whether it's Netflix, you're seeing a lot more, not just diversity initiatives, as you said, but actual green lighting of productions and actual non-green lighting of productions that don't showcase diversity. Dana Walden just spoke of that in a recent summit this past week, how ABC actually said no to productions, no to development deals, no to green lights, where shows from really expert folks came in but didn't have enough diversity because they made the characters that were the neighbor's family were going to be diverse, but the main subject matter family wasn't going to be. Well, that now doesn't get greenlit. Now what gets green lighted is something really much more diverse and inclusive.
Well, that's great to hear. And let's hope that it's a paradigm shift that will stick and grow and as we move to the future. I want to really thank Zabe, Yoon, Caroline, Dalton, great panel. Creativity, arts, culture, music industry, creative, all the industries are important, not just to the economy, not just to the individuals earning a living at it, but I believe to the soul of society and who we are. And so I'm really glad that great people like yourself and so many others are architects of the future. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Christian.
Great. Thank you so much, Charles, for moderating such an important discussion today. Clearly, we are touching on so many different parts of our, not just realities, but our futures. And I'm so grateful to Zabe, Dalton, Yoon, Caroline, for really animating this discussion, bringing to life the challenges, the opportunities, and frankly, some of the ways in which we may need to be collaborating together further to see us through into a future where artists and everyone around the industry is able to grow and succeed. Charles, thank you for your leadership at the university and of course in all aspects of the creative fields that we are so our work, or many of our students and alumni are anchored in. So appreciate your leadership there. And to all of you who have joined us for this conversation, thank you. Thank you for making the time. Thank you for weighing in. And this isn't the last time we're going to be having a conversation like this. On that note, we do convene on important topics that matter to our alumni and friends. And so I invite you to check out all of the opportunities to engage with your fellow alumni and our community. We have book talks, conversations like this, conversations where we are really bringing experts to you on this format. So we will also be doing this in person sometime in the near future. With that, check your email for a recording of this one so you can share it with your friends and family. Until then, be well, and we will see you again very, very soon. Thanks to this panel. Thank you very much, Charles. Bye for now.